What are the odds you and I'd end up at the same summer camp?
From the clumsy connections between stories to characters long forgotten about, these are the MCU trends that seriously need to be fixed. Let's start this list off with disconnected stories. Creating a massive interconnected universe is definitely not an easy task, especially after the Infinity Saga ended in 2019. Why is that, you ask? Well, it leaves writers and fans in an uncomfortable middle ground. You can't really have every single superhero show up when there's a problem. But when the problem is big enough, you sort of expect that they will. So it's no surprise that the writing in Phase 4 felt a bit disconnected. I mean, in Eternals, we definitely needed every single hero available, but they were nowhere to be seen. Obviously, they still want to make separate movies, but if there's an existential threat, you'd think they would all come to help out. And for some reason, existential threats seem to be all over the place these days. The end result is a shared universe that feels much less connected and focused than it did until the end of Phase 3. But who knows, maybe as Phase 5 advances, the connections will start to make a bit more sense. In any case, this next trend has been going on for much longer than that. Can you guess what it is? That's right, it's too much CGI. Okay, we get it. Some things are just too big or too crazy to be filmed in real life. But that should never be an excuse for downright lazy filmmaking. Some of the most recent movies have felt very artificial, and obviously, there has to be some fantasy. Listen, we all love good VFX, but some films seem to rely way too much on CGI. Ant-Man Quantumania is a great example of this, since pretty much the whole film goes down in the Quantumverse. It feels a bit too strange, and it does feel like we're watching a video game at certain points throughout the film. But hey, at least the CGI in Quantumania didn't look as terrible as some other MCU titles. I mean, what were they thinking with Green Lantern? We all know how bad that film was. Not to mention a whole lot of other mess-ups, like Bruce Banner's head floating weirdly in the Hulkbuster suit, or those fake rhinos in Black Panther. Another lazy trick has come in the form of superhero costumes. Back in the day, costume scenes were epic. It was a magical process that was core to the character's development. Nothing was more exciting than watching the heroes don their suits and get into all the action. Sadly, nowadays, a lot of heroes use nanotech suits and masks. Of course, these are very practical for storytelling, because it means that characters can instantly transition back into being normal people. It also means that CGI can do the job instead of some elaborate real-world costume design. Of course, the end result is very different, and some of the excitement goes out the window. I mean, think of that insane suit-up scene from the original Iron Man movie. It just looks amazing, and it provided an amazing transition for his new powers. But in the latest installment, his suit just comes out of nowhere at the push of a button and spreads around his body. It's a cool trick, but it lacks the legendary status of the original, especially now that a bunch of other heroes like Ant-Man do it exactly the same way. At this point, it just looks like a way of saving time for the creators. It's also just not as exciting anymore and doesn't have us on the edge of our seats. That's definitely not the only creative license they've taken. Filmmakers have gone too far when it comes to fake deaths. Okay, so obviously, this was the whole point in Endgame, since some of the heroes had to come back to life on that occasion. But even before that, Marvel movies already had the annoying tendency of having fake deaths. I mean, you could understand this happening once or twice, but after a while, it just drives fans crazy. I can't even count how many characters have been killed off, but miraculously just seem to pop back up. They must have taken a page out of the Fast and Furious franchise books. Some of these are in the form of resurrections, like Thor is in his first individual film, and some are just fake deaths that were convenient for writers, such as Bucky Barnes, Loki, or even Groot. When writers do this too often, it can make deaths seem less serious than they really are, and it makes fans suspicious every time a character actually dies. This can make viewers question the quality of the stories, which of course leads us to the next point. There's nothing worse than bad quality productions. I'm looking at you, She-Hulk. The MCU is a massive franchise with over 30 full-length films to date. You can't expect all of those movies to be amazing. However, there's no escaping the fact that the quality just seems to be dropping. The Infinity Saga definitely had its ups and downs, but the Multiverse Saga seems to be on a pretty general low. Critics have slammed films like Eternals and Ant-Man Quantumania. Of course, critics don't always completely understand superhero movies. But we can't deny that these movies just don't feel as deep and shocking as their predecessors. Still, there are definitely some positives. What did you think of Spider-Man: No Way Home? That film was great. If Marvel can continue to produce films of that quality, they won't have any issues at the box office or among fans. So Marvel are definitely still capable of providing brilliant material, but it might just be a question of them picking quality over quantity. Sadly, I don't think they'll be changing that anytime soon. But speaking of quality, here's another sign of Marvel's decline. We're talking about all the unnecessary jokes. Everyone loved the first installment of the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise. The story was great, the characters were relatable and original, not to mention that it was genuinely funny. However, since then, the MCU has tried to apply that sense of humor to many situations where it just doesn't fit. The DCU has often been criticized for making material that seems too serious, but Marvel has fallen into the opposite trap and often makes their movies too silly in an effort to get some easy laughs. Of course, humor has been an element of superhero stories since they could only be found in comics, but laughs are all about timing, and Marvel seems to get it wrong very often. An obvious example is the air hostess who interrupts Shang-Chi's backstory. We're in the middle of a very serious moment, but the writers decide it's the perfect moment for a dumb joke. I mean, are you serious? It wasn't funny, it was just annoying. And that didn't stop them from doing it constantly in Thor: Love and Thunder. Speaking of Thor, the character was tortured a bit too much in Endgame with a number of fat jokes that felt out of place, especially considering how much he had been through. But of course, Thor is far from the only beloved character who's been ridiculed. Now let's move on to the number one Marvel trend that needs to be fixed. It's none other than the forgotten characters. We get it, there are hundreds of MCU characters at this point, but some of the important ones just aren't getting their fair share. Can you guess who we're talking about? Exactly, the Hulk. Our favorite Green Giant was one of the heroes who kicked off the whole MCU way back in 2008. Back then, the character was played by Edward Norton, who has long since been replaced by Mark Ruffalo. Sadly, Ruffalo's character hasn't enjoyed any main character action and has only been a supporting character in Thor: Ragnarok, the Avengers films, and the controversial She-Hulk miniseries. And Hulk's not alone. Doctor Strange has also lacked attention, even in films with his own name. How's that possible? I don't even know. Apart from them, a lot of small characters have been presented, but they only seem to serve a decorative role. Important characters like Wasp, Valkyrie, or Drax the Destroyer just seem to come and go without much depth. Once again, quantity before quality. This franchise seriously needs to rethink itself. And that's it, superhero fans. From the clumsy connections between stories to forgotten characters, these are the MCU trends that seriously need to be fixed.